Okay, I'm Steve Hilby. This is the At Home Church here in Tracy, California. This is the teaching portion of our worship service that we are now taping that part of it. I'd like to make a couple of comments just before. One is that this is indeed a house church. We are in a house. We have children here, at least one child usually, and they tend to make a lot of noise because we don't have a babysitter here, which is fine. They're sometimes underfoot and all around. So if you hear something or see a little kid streaking through somewhere yelling, understand that this is a house church with real people herein. It's not a studio or a church office or something like that. It's a home where people meet together, worship God, and find out more about His Word. Right now we're in the book of Proverbs. And tonight we're going through the second chapter of Proverbs. And the idea of Proverbs, of course, is that it's supposed to give wisdom. Wisdom to the people who follow God. To help them grow in wisdom day by day. And that wisdom would help you to navigate throughout your daily activities, throughout life, through the things that life throws at you. So we're looking at the second chapter. Before we do, I'd like to go back to the first chapter just for a brief moment. Not so much to recap, but to give us an idea of where this all started. In the first chapter, it's not only an introduction. The first 11 verses are an introduction. And then after that, you have this thing about peer pressure. And the reason that it's there, that whole idea of peer pressure is there, it's kind of an example of what the rest of the book is going to be like as far as wisdom. So it's still a part of the introduction. And then the rest of it talks about how to use that wisdom. Well, in the second chapter, we're going to get into the benefits of wisdom. And I've said before, and I'll say it again, we're not going to go through every chapter, but we'll go through a few of them, and then later on we'll go through subject material in the book of Proverbs. But let's look at that second chapter rather. And in order to understand it, we have to first understand that this is an acrostic. It has 22 double lines. There are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And there's about 4 or 5 different acrostics like this throughout the book of Proverbs, rather. I was going to say Psalms here. Throughout the book of Proverbs. And each of them, yes. I was going to say that. My apologies. Thank you. Let me say first of all about each of them. Each of them have 22 because they are acrostic using the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. An acrostic is exactly that. It uses letters to put out a point. For instance, my daughter teaches second grade this year, and I'm sure that she'll use an acrostic at Christmas time. C stands for carols that we all love to sing. H stands for, what does H stand for? Something, don't know. R in Christmas stands for roving, whatever. In other words, each letter stands for something. That's what an acrostic is, where you have a word and each letter, or you just use the alphabet. For instance, how do I love thee? Let me count the ways. A is for apple. I love your apples. B is for broccoli. I love broccoli. C is for cauliflower. I'm not sure about that. So in other words, you go all the way down through the alphabet like that. That is an acrostic. So there are several acrostics in the book of Proverbs, and this is one. So if you ever wonder why they take so long to say so much, kind of like a preacher, or say so little, is because it's an acrostic and they've got to have a set of verses for each letter of the alphabet. Now, that does not mean they use each letter. They actually did not do that. They simply had one as though they were going to use it. Hebrew poetry is kind of strange in that way. They had to use 22 if it was an acrostic, but they didn't always use the letters in that way. There are 2 parts, or 2 sections, to the second chapter. The first 11 verses is one section, and the second 12 through 22, the second 11 are another. Now, normally, I wouldn't even talk about this kind of thing and put this together, except for the fact that in order to truly understand what the author of this is trying to say, you really have to understand how it's set up. You have to understand that it's an acrostic, first of all, which is why they have so much in there. But second of all, you need to understand, if you're going to really read it and get the most out of it, you have to understand that there are those two sections, and that each of those sections is put into three parts. So for instance, the first part is verse 1 through 4. The second part is 5 through 8. You notice that's 4 verses. The second part, 5 through 8, is another 4 verses. And then the third part is 9 through 11, again 3 verses. So 4 verses, 4 verses, 3 verses. The second section, 11 through 22, does the same thing. 4 verses, and then 3 verses again. So it's set up for you to read it in that way. Part of the reason why people have a tendency to have a problem trying to figure out, really get the meat out of what God's trying to get out of this, is because they don't understand how it's set up. You just kind of read it. My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the... And after a while, it just kind of goes da-da-da-da, and it's mind-numbing. And you go, well, what did I get out of this? I think 3 times now in my life, I have done something that a number of people have suggested you do, and that is to read 5 Psalms each day and 1 chapter of Proverbs. And I've done that 3 times. And each time I have felt, and at the end of a month, you will have read all of the Psalms and all of the Proverbs. And like I said, I've done it 3 times, and each time I have felt completely unfulfilled, and I've thought to myself, what in the world did I get out of that? I know some people get a lot out of it, but when you read it the way it was meant to be read, in this pattern of 4 verses, followed by 4 verses, followed by 3, and then the same pattern again, and that's just this chapter, it doesn't go, every chapter goes that way, then you begin to understand what it is that the author is trying to tell you. That way you can begin to say, now I get the point. These 4 verses have a point that I'm supposed to get. The next 4 verses have a point I'm supposed to get. So, the biggest part of this is the first 11 verses promises wisdom. They promise us understanding, and they promise us knowledge. They are, according to those first 11 verses, a gift from God. The last 11 starts off, the first 4 parts tell us who or what I'm going to be saved from. I need wisdom to be saved. Who or what am I going to be saved from? The first 4 give us one idea of who or what I'm supposed to be saved from. The next 4 do the same thing again. Give us another person or another thing I'm supposed to fear or be saved from by the wisdom of God. And then the last 3 verses tell us very simply that as a result of all of this, we are now to, it's a wrap-up, we are now to use all we have learned in order to walk the good path that God has set before us. So that's the basic outline of this chapter. God, throughout all this, is considered the author of wisdom. You see that all throughout the book of Proverbs, but especially in this chapter, it's a realization that God is the author of all wisdom. It is a direct knowledge from God in order that you and I might live in ways that please God, that make us wholesome to God. So with that, I'd like to start reading this. I'm going to read the first 4 verses. It says, "My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding. Indeed, if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, and if you look for it as for silver and search for it as for hidden treasure." Now, there's no then there yet. That's going to be in the next 4. The first part is if you do these things. If you search for God's wisdom. But I want you to notice here, it's if you search for God's wisdom with everything you have. Notice he talks here about applying your heart, turning your ear to wisdom, your heart to understanding. If you call out, and cry out aloud for understanding, that's with your tongue. If you look for it with your eyes. So what is God saying here? Or what's the author saying? He's saying I need to use everything I've got. My eyes, I need to use my heart, I need to use my tongue. In fact, if you go throughout the book of Proverbs, you find that the tongue is considered to be the mightiest part of your body. So when he talks about using our tongue or using our mouth in order to seek out or to achieve wisdom, he's talking about what he considers to be the most important and mightiest part of our body. Because think about what a tongue can do. A tongue can either lift up or destroy. There you go. And exactly, that's right. You said the book of James. Book of James says the very same thing. The tongue has the power of killing. Think about something somebody has said to you that has just made you feel lower than a snake's belly in a wagon rut. I mean, when that's over, you know they have done harm to you. Inwardly, you ache from it. Often, friendships are destroyed by it. People will feel completely... think about what's happening on social media where you have kids now that are being bullied by that. What's happening is the tongue. They're using words on the screen, but it's the same thing. In essence, it's what they are saying, their tongue, that is doing it. It destroys lives. So he's saying that this incredibly powerful thing, you need to have that attuned to wisdom. You need to have that seeking out, shouting out to God. In other words, seeking it with everything you have. Every part of your body has a function in order to get it. Notice he uses 4 different parts of the body again. Why? Because he wants us all to understand that it's not just part of me. It's all of Steve Hilby. All of me is expected to do it. Now, he could have sat there and go, okay, your big toe, your little toe, the 3 toes in between. But he doesn't need to do that. By using these 4 parts of your body, he's got it straight. Because what's the heart? The heart back then, just like it is today, was considered to be the seat of emotion. Now, we all know today that's up here. Everything comes from up here. But why do we, Valentine's Day, we have the heart and all that because, I love you and everything comes. That's exactly what they felt. They believed back then that the heart literally is where your emotions came from. So he's saying, look, your emotions have to be in tune with God's wisdom. Your tongue must be in tune with God's wisdom. What I search for with my eyes must be in tune with God's wisdom. So everything must be attuned. It must be a single-mindedness. In fact, one of the things that I really enjoyed here is if you look for it as for silver and search for it as for hidden treasure. Silver was and has been throughout history a sign of wealth. And so if you're a miner and you're looking for silver and you strike it, think about it. You're a miner out there looking for silver. You're going to put everything into it, aren't you? You're not going to sit there and say, okay, you know what? I think I'll just take 4 or 5 days off and go swimming. I think maybe I'll go and visit my friend down, in the next country over or whatever, the next town over. I think I'll just... No. When you're searching for silver, you go for it. Everything is about that. People who would look for that, if they're, like you get the 49ers back in 1849 here in California, those guys didn't want to sleep. It was all about finding that gold or the silver. In the Alaskan gold rush, when Ruthie and I were up in Alaska on a trip a few years ago, we went beside a trail that the miners used to go up. And they talked about how these guys would walk that trail for like 2 or 3 days straight without a break because they had to get to that goal before anybody else did. They had to strike it rich before anybody else could. That's putting everything you have into it. So that's what he's telling us here. Not only do you need to put your whole body, but be like a silver miner who puts everything into the finding of that treasure. And if you will, then, he says, then we get to the next 4 verses. Then he says, you will understand the fear of the Lord. Remember, fear does not mean fear like, I'm scared to death of God. Fear means reverence or awe. then you will understand how to reverence, how to be in awe, how to worship God, how to look at him and go, wow, he's incredible. You will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. Knowledge is a great word. You'll find the knowledge of God. Knowledge in both Hebrew and in Greek is a sexual word. In fact, we're going to see that later on in the 19th chapter. We're going to see that a little bit more on a different word. But the idea of knowledge is a sexual, the same word that is used for sexual intercourse. There's no more greater intimacy than sexual intercourse. So he's using a term here to describe that, saying, in other words, I want to have such a knowledge of God that it is as intimate as you can get. And through wisdom, through seeking wisdom, if I really seek his understanding, if I really seek his presence, if I really seek after his insight, then I will have this intimacy with God that I otherwise would not have. I'll be able to stand before God and say, hey, God, what's up? And still be reverent while I do it. I'll be able to talk with him and hear his voice speak to me. I'll have that relationship. It says, for the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He holds success in store for the upright. He is a shield to those whose walk is blameless, for he guards the course of the just and protects the way of his faithful ones. So here's the then. Then, if you search for God's wisdom with everything you have, then you will walk rightly with God and in an intimate and wondrous way. His wisdom brings us into a right relationship with him. God will protect us, though, it says. He says he holds success in store for the upright. He is a shield to those whose walk is blameless. I get success. Sometimes it may not quite look like that, but when you stop and think about it, those old miners, they thought they were succeeding when they got a nugget of gold. Most of those guys walked away completely poor, in poverty. I have a story of my great-great-great-grandfather, one of my great-great-great-grandfathers, and he was a miner, and I traced him back in 1850. So in 1849, he had run off as soon as they announced gold. He had run off, left his girlfriend, his pregnant girlfriend at the time, in Missouri, and ran to the gold field. Apparently didn't know she was pregnant, at least that's what I'm assuming back then, and ran off to the gold fields here in California, up in Placerville, and while he was there, I actually have a sheet that says that he made $1 a day. $1 a day. Now, he probably had to spend at least a nickel, actually more like a quarter, because the inflation was pretty bad. $1 a day. He spent probably a nickel a day, or a quarter a day just on beer. It would have cost him 50 cents a day to live in the barracks or dormitory style of living that he did with 50 other men. And would have cost him at least another 50 cents or more to eat that day. So he's making $1 and spending a minimum of $1.25 every day to live there. Not much wisdom, not much success. He's abandoned. He's done exactly the opposite of what God's word says here. His success is not even fleeting. It's not even there, period. He goes back 2 years later to his son and marries the mother. And I'm not sure exactly what happens after that, but you begin to wonder. He says, then I will protect you and you will have success. I'll protect you and take care of you. Your success may not mean you're going to be a millionaire. I've been following God for a long time and I still have not made my first million. I have a doubt at the age of 66 that I'm ever going to make that million. The camera's moving because our little munchkin is moving it. But that's not how I define success. How do I find success? I start off with the fact that I find success by living the way God wants me to. I have success by the fact that I have a great family that loves me. I have success in that I've been married 43 years to an incredibly beautiful woman. I define success as having people who respect me and like me. In other words, the things that really tend to count are the things that I have found success with as I have followed God's way. To me, those are a lot more important than wearing a $3,000 suit and a $2,000 tie, especially the tie, since I hate ties. Can't stand to wear them. Although I imagine I'd still hate a $2,000 tie. Might look nice, but I'd still hate it. Well, 9 through 11 gives us the result. The result. If you search for God, then you will walk right with God. The result is, then he says, you will understand what is right and just and fair, every good path. For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant for your soul. Discretion will protect you, and understanding will guard you. In other words, you will do, act, and think the ways God wants you to. The ways that will cause people to respect you. The ways that will cause people to say, there's a guy I can stand to be with. Think about that. You will understand what is right and just and fair, every good path. I like that. I'm going to not only, and the word here for understanding isn't just I'm going to know what it is. I'm going to do what it is. That's actually what it means. I will not just understand, but because of that, I will do. I will do what is right. I will do what is just towards other people. In other words, I will act with justice. I will carry forth God's justice when I meet people. Now, carrying forth God's justice doesn't mean I say, thus saith the Lord, and I slay them because they're bad people. No, quite the reverse. I show them God's love. And when something is bad happening to another person, I step in and I help them out. And I be there for them. Because that's what justice is all about. And I'm going to be fair. So in my business dealings, I'm always going to do the things that I should do. When it comes to how I treat my children, I'm going to be fair and equal to all of them. When it comes to how I treat people I don't even know, I'm going to be fair and just and nice to them as well. Every wisdom, it says, will enter my heart. Knowledge will be pleasant to my soul. And discretion is going to protect me. In other words, I'm going to be the kind of person who acts in the way that God wants me to. Well, that brings us to, I know it. That brings us to the 12th chapter, the next 4 sets of 4 verses. It says here, wisdom will save you from the ways of wicked men, from men whose words are perverse, who have left the straight paths to walk in dark ways, who delight in doing wrong and rejoice in the perverseness of evil, whose paths are crooked and who are devious in their ways. In other words, I'm going to be saved. Saved from what? Now, when I say saved, a lot of people, if you've been in church at any time, you probably heard the old jargon, you need to be saved, or I've been saved from. This is not really that. Literally, you're saved from the clutches of evil. You're saved from bad people who are there to harm you. So what is he saying? He says, I'm saved from following the wrong things, from becoming the people that we would otherwise abhor. So here's what happens. Now, it says, who have left the straight paths, walk in dark ways, delight in doing wrong. Again, thinking, I was watching a show today on the 49ers, and not the football team, but the gold miners. And one of the things they're talking about, how most of these guys ended up broke and how they wasted most of their money, those who did actually strike it rich, who did not, like my great-great-great-grandfather, work for $1 a day, but the guys that actually found gold and struck it rich. And it said about how within 24 hours, most of them were already broke. Why? 3 things. Number 1, they would get drunk. Number 2, they'd find a prostitute. And number 3, whatever was left, they gambled away. Not one of those things, but they would do all 3 of those things. At the end of, the next day when they'd wake up with a hangover, they'd find the girl's gone because the money's gone. Their money's gone because they gambled it all away, and they put it into their alcohol, and all they've got left for is a headache and a lot of calluses and broken down shoulders, and now they got to go out and try to get wealthy all over again, so they can do it all over again. It's not wisdom. God says, I want to save you from different things in your life that cause you to not be successful, that cause you to not do it God's way, that cause you to regret the things in your life. So there he's telling us, you're saved from what? You're saved from doing the things that you know you should not be doing. But we do, why? Because, well, everybody else does it. Back to that first thing in the first chapter where we are told not to succumb to peer pressure. Well, let's go on. He says, wisdom will save you also. Again, another saving here. From the adulterous woman, from the wayward woman with her seductive words, who has left the partner of her youth and ignored the covenant she made before God. Surely her house leads down to death, and her paths to the spirits of the dead. None who go to her return or attain the paths of life. We are saved from being seduced again into the wrong way of life. Not only are we saved in the first four from the wrong things in life, but now we are saved from the wrong ways of life. Either you're all in or you're all out. Let me explain that a little bit. I said before I was going to get to verse 19 about that sexual thing. That 19 says, none who go to her return. That's actually in Hebrew, it actually says, none who have intercourse with her. You know, people tend to think the Bible is a prudish book about, the Old Testament and the New Testament both use a lot of sexual imagery. And when it comes to this kind of thing, they are very graphic. And the reason they're very graphic is they want to make the point. So when we read it in English, it just kind of, none who go to her return. It's like, if you go down the lane over to that lady over there and she's wicked, for whatever reason you won't return because you'll get seduced. No, you're not going to return to her because you're going to become intimate with her ways. Just as if you were having sex with her. It says you're not going to attain the paths of life, the paths that God gives us. Notice here it says she not only has seductive words, but she left the partner of her youth. Now, that is code word, of course, for her husband. She left her husband. But there's another meaning to that. You know, when they're this age, they're very innocent. If I had a 38-year-old doing the kinds of things that he was doing, I'd be going, okay, he's trying to destroy what we're trying to build here. I mean, this guy is being disruptive for a reason. Now, he's being disruptive because he's 2.5. That's just the way it is. 2.5-year-olds, and he's loving, and he loves to hug you, and he'll tell you he loves you, and he's very innocent. Even when he cries and gets mad, he gets over it very quickly, and he's just a kid. And you gotta love the little guy. When he gets older, what will he be like? So what she's saying here, what he's saying, the author is that she has left her youth. She has left God. The love that God was bestowing on her, she has left that. And when we leave God's wisdom, we leave God's love behind. So, verses 20 through 22, this wraps it up. It says, thus. So first part, remember before we go, if, then we go, you're saved. Now we have thus. Thus is a conclusion. Thus you will walk in the ways of the good and keep to the paths of the righteous. For the upright will live in the land, and the blameless will remain in it. But the wicked will be cut off from the land, and the unfaithful will be torn from it. In other words, there's a recompense at the end of life. When I go to meet God, I'll stand before him, and God will count where I've been, who I've been with. By keeping God's ways, we will stay righteous. We will stay blameless before God. Doesn't mean I'm always going to be perfect in God's eyes. Doesn't mean I'm always going to be wise. Doesn't mean I'm never going to do something stupid that I'm going to regret. I don't know of anybody ever, other than Jesus, who has lived that kind of a life, even after becoming a Christian, where they can say, I have absolutely zero regrets. I have never said, never done, never thought or acted in a way that would be unpleasing to God. That's not the point. The point is where do I put my focus? Where do I put my focus? But notice here, you cannot go halfway. You can't say, I'm going to be wise in some things, but I'm going to do my own thing in others. I'm going to listen to God on this, but I'm going to do my own on that. You can't say that. Let's go back to that first set of verses and that set of verses here in verse 19. It says here that in the first 4 verses, how I'm supposed to put everything I have into it. He doesn't say you're supposed to put part of you into it. He doesn't say, well, use your tongue for sometimes to be with God. It's supposed to be everything. And that's why that 19th verse is so very important. Why I pointed out the fact that that's about intercourse. Why? Because let's be really honest with you. There's no such thing as a little bit pregnant. Think about that. You cannot be a little bit pregnant, right? You either are or you're not. You're either all the way in or you're not. One or the other. And that's the whole point of this, is it's got to be God. Because you cannot say, in this part of my life, I will be for God in his ways, and in this part of my life. That's modernism. Modernism says we must segment our lives. We have a work life, we have a leisurely life, we have a scholastic life, we have a life with these friends over here, we have a life with those friends over there, and in each of these I am a different person because each of these situations calls to be a different person. God says no. All of life is sacred. All of life requires his wisdom. We cannot segregate and say, here I want God's wisdom, and here I will do my own thing. So the point of this becomes not only the benefits of wisdom, but the necessity, if we're going to be God's people, of staying with him and searching for that wisdom with everything we have, and doing all we can to use his wisdom in all areas of our lives. And with that, we will conclude. Next week, we'll pick this up and continue on in the book of Proverbs. Thank you very much.